Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's, a little unsettling, honestly, but incredibly important: resisting authoritarianism. We've got some really fascinating source material to dig into for this one.
Oh, yeah.
Excerpts from a study guide, some thought-provoking notes, and even a powerful book all about how democracies can crumble and what we can do to prevent that from happening.
You know what really struck me was how much this material connects those historical lessons to what we're seeing play out in the world today. It's not just a history lesson, is it?
No, not at all.
It's a call to action.
It really is. And one of those surprising things I learned was this idea of anticipatory obedience.
Anticipatory obedience.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of this?
I have.
It's kind of wild. Like, people willingly giving up their freedoms even before they're forced to?
It's almost like a preemptive surrender, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Like trying to guess what a repressive government might demand and then just offering it up without even being asked.
Exactly. And the book gives these crazy examples from Nazi Germany. Like, people were so eager to please the new regime that they started doing things like, marking Jewish shops.
Yeah.
Or reporting on their neighbors, even though nobody told them to do that.
And what's really scary is that this behavior wasn't limited to just, a few extremists. It was widespread, even among folks who didn't really agree with the Nazi ideology.
Like going along with it.
Exactly. They went along with it because everyone else
But they didn't want to stand it.
didn't want to rock the boat.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so dangerous, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like a social contagion.
Totally.
And it's not just ancient history either.
Right.
The book talks about the Milgram experiment,
Oh, yeah.
which honestly just blew my mind.
It's a classic, isn't it?
Totally. Ordinary people, they were willing to administer what they thought were painful electric shocks.
To another person.
Yeah. Just because someone in a lab coat told them to.
I mean, it really makes you question, how much are we really thinking for ourselves?
Yeah. Right. Are we
Are we just kind of going with the flow even if something feels wrong?
just
Because everyone else is doing it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought.
It is. And it leads us to another crucial part of how authoritarianism takes root: the attack on truth. The source material outlines 4 ways that truth can be undermined.
Yeah.
And it actually forms a pretty chilling acronym: SLAM.
Oh, I like that.
SLAM. Shamanistic incantation, lies, alternative facts, and magical thinking.
So each of these tactics distorts reality and makes it harder to figure out what's actually true.
Right. So shamanistic incantation, that's when you use language to stir up emotions
Oh,
instead of giving factual information.
They're like using really loaded terms in propaganda.
Exactly. Then there's the just straight up lies, just blatant falsehoods to deceive and manipulate people.
Which we see all the time these days with all the misinformation flying around.
All the time. Then you've got alternative facts,
Right.
which present like this distorted version of reality that often just confirms people's biases.
Right.
So it creates those echo chambers where truth becomes subjective.
Exactly. Everybody's got their own truth.
And finally, you've got magical thinking,
Right.
which relies on superstitions and just unfounded beliefs to explain complicated events.
That leads to a lot of scapegoating,
Oh, yeah?
conspiracy theories,
Look at all that.
which can get really dangerous.
Really dangerous. And the book actually argues that this erosion of truth, this whole post-truth era, is basically a precursor to fascism.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it is chilling when you think about it like that.
It is, right.
If we can't even agree on basic facts,
How can we?
how do we function as a democracy?
Exactly.
It's like we're trying to build a house on a quicksand.
You can't.
You can't do it.
Okay, so we've covered some pretty heavy stuff, I know.
Yeah, we have.
We've seen how anticipatory obedience paves the way for authoritarianism,
That's the stage.
and how the erosion of truth makes it so much harder to resist it.
Right.
But don't despair.
Don't worry.
We're not going to leave you hanging with this feeling of impending doom.
Oh, no.
We promise.
We've got solutions.
We do. The next part of our deep dive is all about action.
That's right.
We're going to explore practical steps that we can all take
Yes.
to defend the truth, hold our leaders accountable,
Yes.
and safeguard our democracy. So stick with us.
Stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Daily Mind Brew podcast. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. Check out the podcast summary for key takeaways and actions you can take to be a defender of democracy today. And now, back to the conversation.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you're ready to go from understanding these threats to actually doing something about them.
Yeah. Because what good is all this knowledge if we don't actually put it into action, right?
Exactly.
The source material really emphasizes this. It doesn't just lay out the problem. It offers some solutions, some really concrete steps we can take to push back.
Yeah, and a big one it stresses is defending institutions. You know, those pillars of democracy that we often just kind of take for granted.
Absolutely. We're talking the free press, a fair and independent judiciary, strong labor unions.
All that good stuff.
It's easy to assume they'll always be there.
Right.
But these sources make it really clear they need our active support to survive. It's not a given.
They don't protect themselves.
Exactly. Think of it like a garden. You can't just plant seeds and expect them to flourish on their own, right?
Right.
You got to water them, weed them, protect them from pests. Institutions are the same way. They need our care and attention.
So what does that actually look like in our daily lives?
Well, it can be as simple as subscribing to your local newspaper,
Yeah.
donating to a legal defense fund, maybe volunteering your time at a voter registration drive.
Writing to your elected officials.
Exactly. Or even just showing up,
Yeah.
Attending town hall meetings, participating in peaceful protests, engaging in civil discourse. All these actions show our commitment to democratic values. It sends a powerful message.
It does. And the sources also point out something that might not be so obvious. The role of professional ethics in all of this.
Oh, yeah, it's huge, right? Think about it. Professionals, lawyers, doctors, journalists, teachers, civil servants, they all have positions of authority and influence.
They do.
And they have that specialized knowledge and a code of ethics that guides their actions.
And the book actually gives this really disturbing example. Hans Frank, Hitler's lawyer.
Yeah.
This guy used legal arguments to justify Nazi atrocities.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a stark reminder of what happens when we compromise our ethics for political convenience.
For sure, it's a slippery slope.
It really is. And it highlights how important it is for professionals to take a stand, to either enable tyranny or resist it. We got to hold on to our ethical standards, even when it's hard, even when we're under pressure.
Which sometimes might mean saying no to orders that feel wrong. Speaking out against injustice, even when it's risky.
Absolutely. It takes courage. Which brings us to another tool we have in resisting authoritarianism. Symbols. Yeah. They might seem small, but they can be incredibly powerful.
Oh, they are.
Totalitarian regimes, they've always understood this. They use symbols to dehumanize their opponents, to control the public narrative, to create an atmosphere of fear and conformity.
Like the yellow stars that the Nazis forced Jews to wear. Or the mandatory displays of loyalty in communist regimes.
Yeah. It can be really subtle, too. A symbol that seems harmless can get twisted, manipulated to serve an oppressive agenda. We got to be aware of that.
So don't just passively accept the messages that are thrown at you.
Exactly. Think critically. What are they really trying to sell you? What emotions are they playing on? What values do they represent?
And that brings us to what might be the most important element in all of this. Courage.
Yeah. It might sound kind of cliche, but
Okay.
resisting authoritarianism takes guts, both big and small.
Big and small. The book highlights some incredible stories of individuals who stood up to oppression. When it seemed impossible, they did it.
Winston Churchill, standing up to Hitler.
Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat on the bus.
Those students facing down tanks in Tiananmen Square. These are all acts of courage that changed the course of history.
They really did. But courage doesn't have to be a huge dramatic gesture.
Right.
Sometimes it's speaking up when you hear a prejudice joke, or refusing to share misinformation online. It's making the hard choice, the right choice, even when you feel like the whole world's against you.
And it's important to remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. We all feel fear. It's human. Courage is acting in spite of that fear.
So we've covered a lot. We've talked about defending institutions, upholding those professional ethics, recognizing the power of symbols, and cultivating courage. These are all tools for resisting authoritarianism, for keeping our freedoms.
But there's one more crucial piece to all this that we need to dig into. The importance of connecting with each other, building community, and fostering resilience. That's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
Thanks for listening to the Daily Mind Brew podcast. Your voice matters. Don't miss the podcast summary, key takeaways, and action steps you can take today to protect democracy. Together, we can make change happen. And now, let's jump back into the podcast.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into resisting authoritarianism. We've covered some intense stuff, but stick with us because this last part is about taking action. And it's honestly the most hopeful part of all this.
It really is. We've talked about the dangers of just sitting back and doing nothing, the ways truth gets twisted, and how important courage is. But now let's focus on how to build resilience, both as individuals and as a society.
And one thing the sources really highlight is the power of human connection in resisting tyranny. We tend to think of resisting as this big, heroic thing, but it really starts with those small, everyday interactions.
Yeah. The book even talks about simple stuff like making eye contact with strangers, striking up conversations. It might sound kind of insignificant, but
Right.
those little connections help build trust, they create a sense of community, and that makes us less vulnerable to isolation and manipulation.
It reminds us we're not in this alone.
Exactly.
We're all part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And the sources also mention how important it is to build a strong private life, to contribute to good causes, and to engage in what they call corporeal politics.
Corporeal politics.
Have you heard of this?
I have. It's basically about being present in public spaces with people who share your values. Attending rallies, joining community groups, participating in protests. It's all about creating a visible presence.
To counter that narrative of fear and isolation that authoritarian regimes love to push.
Exactly. It's a way of showing that we're not afraid, we're here, we're standing together, and our voices will be heard.
And speaking of voices, the sources also talk about being mindful of the language we use, to be kind to our language, as the book puts it.
Oh yeah, that really resonated with me.
Me too. It's about recognizing that words have power. They can be used to inspire, but they can also be used to manipulate and divide.
Absolutely. So the sources encourage us to really think about the language we're hearing, to avoid those overused cliches and slogans that can shut down critical thinking.
And to cultivate a richer vocabulary.
Yes. And they even suggest, spending less time scrolling through doom and gloom online and picking up a book instead.
More books.
I'm all for that. Books give you depth, context, a broader perspective. You can grapple with complex ideas, challenge your assumptions, and really expand your understanding of the world.
It's like a workout for your brain.
Totally. And of course, we can't forget about supporting investigative journalism.
Well, it's crucial.
Those journalists who are out there digging for the truth, holding the powerful accountable, they're vital for a healthy democracy.
It's like investing in the immune system of our democracy.
Exactly.
One last point that I found really important is the distinction the sources make between patriotism and nationalism.
Yes, this is key. Patriotism is about loving your country and wanting to make it better, holding it to a higher standard. Nationalism is about blind allegiance. It's the belief that your nation is superior no matter what.
And to help us see the difference, the sources ask some really challenging questions, like, is it patriotic to admire foreign dictators? Is it patriotic to avoid paying taxes but demand that others support your cause?
Those are great questions. They make you confront those uncomfortable truths about what you believe and how you're acting, They make you ask yourself if your actions are really in line with democratic values.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's go back to that powerful line from the book. If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny.
It's a sobering reminder of what's at stake here. The fight for democracy is never over. It takes constant work, it takes vigilance, it takes courage, and it takes a willingness to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's hard.
But the good news is, we don't have to be superheroes to make a difference. We can all contribute to building a more just and resilient world in our own way.
Absolutely. Remember all those little acts of connection, of courage, of speaking the truth? When millions of people do those things, it creates a force powerful enough to resist tyranny and protect democracy.
So here's the final thought we want to leave you with. What small act of courage will you commit to? What step will you take, even if it seems small, to bring us closer to that just and resilient world we all want? Because the future of democracy depends on each and every one of us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and inspiring.
And remember, the fight for freedom is never truly over. It's up to all of us to keep that flame burning bright.